can call your next witness.
Yes, sir, Your Honor. The state would next call Nicolas Coutu.
Mr. Coutu, good morning to you, sir. Watch your step as you come forward. If you need a glass or water, let us know. We'll do our best to accommodate you.
All right, thank you.
Only thing I ask, if there's an objection made during the course of your testimony, just pause, let me rule on the objection, and we'll go from there. And you can adjust the microphone
Okay.
as you deem necessary.
Thank
With that said, state your name and quiet, you're ready.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please introduce yourself and spell your last name, please.
My name is Nicolas Coutu, C-O-U-T-U.
What is your occupation?
I am a crime laboratory analyst in the biology section at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Is Florida Department of Law Enforcement commonly referred to as FDLE?
Yes, that's correct.
How long have you been employed with FDLE?
Since August of 2015.
And I think you stated you were a crime laboratory analyst in the biology division.
Yes.
And what are your duties and responsibilities as being an analyst in the biology division?
I will examine items of evidence that are submitted to the laboratory for the possible presence of bodily fluids such as semen, saliva, blood, as well as hairs, and then do STR DNA testing on these items of evidence, perform statistical calculations, and testify to these results as necessary.
Could you please tell us about your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology and Cell Sciences from the University of Florida.
Prior to being an analyst with FDLE, did you have any prior experience in the analysis involving DNA?
No, I was first hired as a forensic technologist and then was promoted to a crime laboratory analyst at FDLE.
Now, does FDLE, going from that forensic technologist to a crime laboratory analyst, is there an intensive in-house training program?
Yes. The crime laboratory analyst training program at FDLE is a rigorous two-part training program. It took approximately a year and a half to complete. The first portion consists of academic readings, written exams, oral exams, and practicing serological techniques and DNA testing techniques on training samples. And the second phase was completed after completing supervised casework, in which I analyzed evidence that was submitted to the laboratory under the direct supervision of a qualified analyst.
Have you testified before in giving your opinion regarding the field of DNA testing, analyzing, comparing, and identifying?
Yes, about 15 times.
And have you testified here locally in Duval County before?
Yes.
What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is found in every cell of the human body with the exception of mature red blood cells. Half is inherited from your mother, half is inherited from your father. And it contains the genetic blueprint that controls your body's functions, but also makes you human and makes you unique. And no two individuals have the same DNA with the exception of identical twins.
Now, I think you talked about that you do testing with STR. What is that?
STR, DNA testing, is the specific kind of testing that we conduct at FDLE. STR stands for short tandem repeat. Essentially, I analyzed 24 specific regions of the DNA for my DNA testing. And these are what are referred to as short tandem repeats. These are regions of the DNA that have a particular pattern repeated so many times. The specific number of times that this pattern has been repeated is what's referred to as a DNA type for an individual at that region. So it's the collection of these particular DNA types for an individual that creates a DNA profile that's unique to that person. So in the same way that you have a social security number or a phone number, all of the individual numbers that comprise that phone number might not be unique, but it's that combination of all of them together that makes it unique to you.
And do you and your lab undergo proficiency testing?
Yes.
And what is that?
A proficiency test is a test that is purchased from an outside vendor to test and assess my knowledge and my skills in terms of doing DNA testing or serological testing. I complete this twice a year per FBI accreditation requirements.
And does also FDLE, what do they do for quality assurances within the lab?
For quality assurance, there's a number of measures that we'll take with items of evidence. I'll only work one item of evidence at a time. I have a variety of personal protective equipment, such as gloves that I change frequently, a face mask, hairnet, lab coat. I'll thoroughly clean my area prior to working an item and as well as after working that item before moving on to something else, only having one tube open at a time. We also have controls so that we can track the possibility of any sort of contamination that might occur, that we're getting expected results from the reactions and the testing that we're performing, and then a whole entire review process as well throughout the testing.
Is FDLE accredited?
Yes, FDLE has been accredited since 1990. Most recently, we received our reaccreditation this year in 2023 from the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board.
What are population frequencies?
Population frequencies would refer to the frequency of those DNA types, or they're also called alleles, for particular individuals within a population. So how common or how uncommon those particular DNA types are that you've inherited from your mother or father.
What are the types of items that can be tested generally for DNA? A couple categories.
Generally, most things can be submitted to DNA for DNA testing at FDLE. We work a variety of swabs from surfaces or items. We will take in items of evidence that are submitted, and then we'll swab them ourselves or do visual examinations for any possible staining and test those. There are a few restrictions within the evidence submission manual at FDLE that restrict what items are submitted. These can include things like stomach contents, urine, fecal material. Anything of that nature would require supervisor approval prior to being examined within our laboratory system.
Now, when you're talking about most things, could that also be in regards to proving paternity?
Yes, in terms of paternity cases, we can get cheek swabs, also known as buccal swabs, from an individual, from the parents and from the child. If this is a case of a miscarriage or a possible abortion, then there are fetal remains that can be submitted, and paternity testing can be conducted in that manner as well.
Now, are there a variety of results that can be obtained from DNA testing?
Yes.
Tell us about some of those.
So the types of results that I can obtain from my DNA testing, I can either obtain no results, I can obtain limited results to where I have some DNA types present, but not in a sufficient amount that I can make any sort of determination as to the number of contributors in those results, so I can't make comparisons. Essentially, they're uninterpretable if it's limited. DNA results can be single source or having originated from one person. I can either obtain DNA types at each of the 24 regions I've tested for that individual, which would be a complete profile. If I'm unsuccessful and don't have complete DNA types at every single region, that's what's referred to as a partial profile. If there are DNA results that are consistent with having originated from more than one contributor, that's referred to as a mixture. I can then assess and try to determine the number of contributors in that mixture. And then if there are simply too many contributors for me to be able to successfully identify how many people might be present, that also falls in the category of being uninterpretable, and that's known as a complex mixture that I'm no longer able to interpret.
Now, Mr. Coutu, did you receive evidence involving kind of a mixture of situations, a sexual assault and also a death investigation of IS, identified in 3 unique FDLE numbers that were cross-referenced, 2018-040, 2811, 2019 040486, and 2019 0400001.
That is correct.
When I say cross-reference, does that just mean that they are related in some form or fashion with the police?
Yes, they were submitted as different case numbers, but they're all related to the same offense usually.
And would your casework been between the time frames of 2019 and as recent as this year?
I believe that's correct.
And I'm going to work a little bit backwards with you. In regards to this case, I'm going to start with the last submission that you received. That would have been approximately of August of 2023 when you made your opinions. Do you recall that, Mr. Coutu?
Yes, I do have the report in front of me.
Okay. And did you receive two items to review during that submission?
Yes, the submission contained packaging that had multiple bras that were a tan bra with lace, and a red bra, as well as a separate package that contained just a blue bra that was submitted for analysis.
Okay. So in total, you received 4 bras. Is that fair to say? In this submission, would that have been in actually July of 2023 when FDLE received these items?
That is correct.
Now, when you commence your analysis of these items, do you do a visual observation first, or do you go to making cuttings or submitting into the DNA STR program? Tell us about that.
So for an article of clothing such as this, I would open the packaging, conduct a visual examination, as you said. So I'll take notes just of general observations of if there is staining, what kind of condition the clothing is in, describing it, marking any tags, any identifying features that are unique to the clothing that I'll be able to recognize later on. I then will conduct any possible serological testing on some stains. For example, serology being the identification of bodily fluids. So if there is, for example, red-brown staining that's consistent with possibly being blood, I can do a presumptive test to see if there are chemical indications for blood. Otherwise, I would proceed with taking a sample from my STR DNA testing process, in which case for these items, I would typically take a cutting from within inside each cup, as well as a general swabbing from the inside of the bra, as well as the clasp area from each.
And in regards to all 4 of these items, were you able to ascertain any DNA that was interpretable?
Let me refresh myself. No. From the tan bra with lace, this item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA to proceed with my DNA testing, so it didn't go further with the process to even try to develop DNA results. For the red bra, no DNA results were obtained. For the tan bra, there were limited DNA results. However, due to the limited nature of the DNA results, this data was not interpretable. And for the blue bra, this item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process.
Now, Mr. Coutu, If items were found in a landfill, how could that affect the ability for DNA to potentially be available on an item to meet that sufficiency requirement for testing?
There are a variety of factors that affect the persistence of DNA. Some of these could include whether or not there are environmental factors, such as being exposed to rain that could potentially wash something away. If there was exposure to sunlight that has UV radiation, which can damage and degrade the DNA. There could be the possibility of being exposed to components such as humic acid in soil, which can affect our DNA testing, as well as any sort of bacterial growth or chemical components of other things that might degrade the DNA or inhibit our testing process later down the road.
So that kind of brings up my next question. You had talked about that touch DNA. What does that mean, touch DNA?
So touch DNA would refer to DNA that is transferred from handling or touching an item, typically through friction of having touched that surface.
Now, for example purposes, if I'm here and I have both of my hands, one on the right, one on the left, and I'm gripping this podium as I'm talking to you, let's say I go and I sit back down in my chair, a crime scene detective then comes back, takes a swab, swabs the right side, swabs the left side. Does that mean that you would have 100% enough DNA to do DNA testing from that swab?
No, it's possible that there would be DNA left behind in appreciable amounts that I would get results. It's also possible that there would not be enough DNA left behind for me to get interpretable results from that. There's a number of factors that come into play. For example, how long you've been in contact with that item, how much friction was involved in the contact of either a brief touch or more vigorous handling of an item, if it's porous versus non-porous, and if you had just recently washed your hands prior to touching it. All of those things can affect how much DNA is eventually transferred and left behind.
And of course, I've given that example with me just standing here under a roof inside of a building, and I think that you had then explained that something out in the elements, there's a lot more factors that goes into whether the DNA is degraded or not degraded. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Now, could also that include if someone came back behind me and took some cleaning material with a paper towel and wiped down these areas, is the likelihood then of getting my DNA on this podium, has it drastically decreased?
Yes, if you were to clean a surface, even just manually wiping it, that would also diminish the DNA results or the amount of DNA that would be left behind.
All right, thank you, sir. I think that kind of helps us as we move on. So again, just kind of moving backwards, did you receive a handgun and 2 magazines and another submission that you had received, appears in, January of 2019? Or actually, no, these items you would have received in May of 2019. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I did receive a handgun and 2 magazines in May of 2019, and that should be part of the July 31st, 2019 report.
Now, and we'll talk about it in just a moment, but by this time frame, in May of 2019, had there been known standards submitted to FDLE?
I would have to verify.
Yes, sir. Please take your time. I'm sorry, that would have been from April of 2023. Is that when you received some known standards as well?
Yes, so for this particular case, in terms of submissions, the 2019-040-0486, at that time, when I was reporting results for the handgun and 2 magazines, there were no buccal swabs or cheek swabs that were submitted in this case, there were buccal swabs from cross-reference cases available. And then the first set of buccal swabs or cheek swabs that were submitted in this case were April of 2023, as you said.
Because I think overall, and tell me if I'm wrong, if you need to refer to your record to help refresh your recollection, overall, did you obtain, and just overall the pendency of the casework that you did you receive a known standard from a Stevie Griffin?
Yes.
Did you receive a known standard from a Kim Mobley?
Yes.
Did you receive a known standard from a Samaya Mobley?
Yes.
Did you receive a known standard from a Kyrie Mobley?
Yes.
And then, again, we'll talk about it last. Back in 2018, did you receive a known standard part of a sex kit of an Ayanna Sawyer?
Yes.
And then in January of 2019, did you receive known standards of a Kamar Humphrey and a Johnathan Quiles?
The buccal swabs from Johnathan Quiles were submitted in January of 2019, and the buccal swabs from Kamar Humphrey were submitted in November of 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Coutu. So, and we'll get back to that April submission in just a moment. Let's talk about the handgun from July of 2019. What were you asked to do with the handgun and the 2 magazines, sir?
To assess it again for any possible staining, as well as any DNA profiles that could be generated from swabbing that item.
Now, did you do a visual inspection as well on the handgun and the 2 magazines?
Yes.
And in regards to the handgun, did you notice anything abnormal in your visual inspection?
Let me refer to my case notes. In my visual examination of the firearm, there was brownish staining that was observed along the slide, the frame, and beneath the barrel of the firearm. I was then able to conduct a presumptive test to try and identify the chemical indications of blood, and these were negative, so there were no chemical indications for the possible presence of blood. This was completed by doing a chemical color change test. I took a small rubbing of each area of staining, and then through the application of 3 different chemicals, waited to see if there was a color change to a pink coloration, and if there was, that would be chemical indications. However, that was not the case here, so there were no chemical indications for the possible presence of blood, and there were no apparent stains noted on either of the magazines that were submitted in the same item.
Okay, thank you for that. And then in regards to the actual DNA testing of the handgun, can you tell us about those results, please, sir?
For the swabbing from the handgun, this sample failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR-DNA testing process. From the first magazine, which I had labeled magazine A, a complete profile consistent with a male individual was obtained from item 14, magazine A. I was then able to make comparisons to the buccal swabs I had at the time, which were from Ayanna Sawyer, Kamar Humphrey, and Johnathan Quiles, each of whom were excluded as the source of the DNA profile on this firearm magazine. And for the second magazine, which I had labeled magazine B, a sample was taken, and this sample failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process.
Now, when you received those additional known standards in 2023, did you then go back and compare them to this male standard? Because I believe 2 out of the 4 were males that were submitted to you after the fact to magazine A.
Yes, I did make subsequent comparisons. My later comparisons show that Stevie Griffin, Kim Mobley, Samaya Mobley, and Kyrie Mobley are all excluded as contributors to the DNA profile obtained from magazine A.
Now, when you received these items, did they come with already DNA touch swabs, or did you actually do the swabs yourself?
I swabbed the firearm myself.
And what areas would you have swabbed the firearm?
In this instance, I believe it was a general swabbing of the entire firearm, avoiding the areas of brownish staining. Actually, no, it was a general swabbing from the entire outer surface.
And in regards to the firearm and the 2 magazines, do you also make your own markings on those items so that later on you can verify that those are the items you tested?
Yes, I'll do that with any item of evidence submitted to the laboratory. So the outer packaging will have my seals with initials as well as my markings, in addition to the items themselves.
I'm showing you State's Evidence 37. Do you recognize it? You can take a moment and look at it.
Yes, I do.
Now, there's those items that we were just talking about.
Yes, these are.
Now, there's also another small vanilla envelope. Do you recognize it?
I do not recognize
Okay,
this.
so that's not associated with anything you did.
No, the case number is the same, but it does not bear my markings.
So that would be associated with Laura Draga, who also did some testing on the gun.
Yes, that must have been from the firearms section, from subsequent analysis.
I apologize. I messed up in my order, so I'll get it straight, the rest of them, but this is a little bit out of order. So in April of 2023, did you also receive, in regards to those 4 known standards, a swab from a plastic bottle identified as Dong Quay?
Yes.
And were you asked to do DNA analysis of that swab?
Yes, the swab had actually been previously submitted, so that's why as part of that report it was not re-examined, but comparisons were still made to those buccal swabs that were submitted.
Now, in regards to the 7 known standards that we have at this time, were you able to identify anyone to the swab of the Dong Quai bottle?
Yes, I believe that item had previously been reported as a mixture consistent with 2 individuals. And so from any comparisons I had been able to make, everyone had been excluded with the exception of Kim Mobley, who was included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained from that item. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample had originated from Kim Mobley and an unrelated individual than from 2 unrelated individuals.
Mr. Coutu, is it fair to say that there is around 7 billion people in the world?
I believe about that, probably more.
So 700 billion, though, is way greater than the known population of our planet.
Yes, this number is not directly linked to the amount of people on the planet, but it is a much larger number than the current population. That is correct.
All right. Next, sir, drawing your attention to the time frame of February 2019, March 2019, and April 2019, did you receive another series of items in this particular 3 cases that you did work on?
Yes.
I believe there were 9 item numbers associated with this submission overall.
Yes, that's correct.
And could you tell us what each item is, and then just go ahead and tell us your findings for each one, please, sir?
Sure, I will go down the list. So for that report, which encompasses those 3 submissions, as you had mentioned, there was a pink bra. This pink bra failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. And due to the limited nature of the DNA results obtained from this item, this data was not interpretable. And then subsequently we have pink and black underwear that was submitted. Similarly, this item failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. It also failed to give chemical indications for the presence of semen. And 2 separate samples were taken, one from the waistband, I believe, and then one from the crotch as well. Both of these samples failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process. Then there was a red and purple bra submitted. This item failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. And the DNA results obtained from this item demonstrated the presence of a mixture. However, due to the limited nature of the mixture that was obtained, this data is not interpretable. And then there was another pink bra, which was FDLE item 8.
And just to also, in regards to the first pink bra, was that then agency number 8-1 for the first pink bra?
No, that would have been agency number 9-2.
Oh, I'm sorry, under FDLE item number 5. Thank you.
Yes. So then this pink bra, for the results I'm about to give, was FDLE item 8 or agency exhibit number 8-1. So for this item, it also failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood, and no DNA results were obtained from this item. For the pink bra, that is FDLE item 9, or the agency exhibit number 8-2. This item failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. and the item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process. And then there was an electric saw that was submitted. This saw failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. For the rain suit, which was a pair of jacket and pants, this item failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. For item 12, which is Quay,
I think we had talked about that one already.
we did, yes, I apologize. That was a mixture of 2 donors.
Came back ultimately as 1 male and 1 female, and the female came back to Kim Mobley, correct?
Yes, the female contributor was consistent with Kim Mobley's DNA profile.
All right, thank you, sir.
And for item 13, this is a swab from plastic bottle indicated as parsley. However, due to the limited nature of the DNA results obtained from this item, this data was not interpretable.
Mr. Coutu, I'm going to go ahead and just show you a couple of items. You can please look at States 44 for a moment.
Yes, I do recognize this.
And is this FDLE item number 5 that you had mentioned as evidence 9-2 for JSO purposes that you just discussed regarding your results?
Yes, I recognize the unique yellow FDLE barcode as well as my markings, my seal and initials on the outer packaging, as well as my markings on the item itself.
And there was not any DNA results interpretable on this particular item?
No, there were limited results that were obtained, so they were not interpretable.
Now, you also had mentioned about the touch DNA swab from the parsley and the Don Quay. If you can just take a moment here and look at states 53 and 52.
Yes, I recognize these as well for the same reasons. I can see my markings on the outer packaging, the unique FDLE case number and item number, as well as on the internal packaging, my markings as well for that case.
And are those 52 and 53, in fact, the swabs of the Don Quay and the parsley bottles?
Yes.
Now, in states 55, 56, 57, and 54, are these known standards that you had received in this case? We'll start with States 54. Do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
And is it a known standard?
Yes, these are buccal swabs from Samaya Mobley.
All right. And then in States 55, is it a known standard?
Yes, I do recognize these, and they are buccal swabs that were submitted for Kim Mobley.
And then if you could please look at States 56.
These are buccal swabs submitted for Kyrie Mobley.
And do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And then lastly, in States 57, do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
And are they as well a known standard of an individual?
Yes, these are buccal swabs that were submitted for Stevie Griffin.
And next I'm showing you States 61. Do you recognize it? I know you have to just orient yourself with it.
Yes, I do.
And is State 61 the known DNA standard of Johnathan Quiles?
Yes.
All right, may the witness stand up to look at the items?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Coutu, you recognize State 62A and B. You take a moment to orient yourself. Do you recognize State 62A and B?
Yes, I do.
And is this the rain suit that you had mentioned earlier in regards to the submission?
Yes, it is.
And I believe you stated that the rain suit did not test positive for blood, a presumptive test. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
And after you did that, did you do any further DNA testing on these items?
I don't believe there was any additional testing on those items.
Your Honor, I have a couple more questions for Mr. Coutu. Based upon the items, may we step down in front of the jury?
Sure.
Now, Mr. Coutu, the reason why I had you step down, are there a variety of circles-esque markings on each of these items, frontwards and backwards?
Yes.
Did you make this?
Yes, I did.
You just described to the jury why.
So these would be areas of either brownish, reddish-brown staining, gray staining that might be indicative of some sort of an old blood stain. And so I was testing for the possible presence of blood from any of these stains throughout the pants as well as the rain jacket. So I would take rubbings of each of the areas that were circled and then do my chemical color change test where I added 3 different chemicals to try and see if there was a pink color change that was indicative of the chemical presence of blood, and these were all negative from my testing, so there's no further analysis conducted on either of these items.
Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Coutu, if the fact that that's a rain suit, and if someone wore that while it was raining, could that affect the ability for the blood, the DNA, to be degraded?
The rain could potentially wash away some of the chemical indications. However, usually when there's a negative result, it could either be due to a low concentration of the chemicals that we're looking for, or because simply there was no blood that was present to begin with in the stain.
So there's a possibility of reasons why something may or may not have blood on them.
Correct. It might either not be blood, or if it was blood, it was diluted or somehow degraded to the point that it was under our sensitivity thresholds for detection with our testing.
And Mr. Coutu, again, going in a backward order, did you receive a submission as well involving items from January of 2019 and February of 2019?
Yes.
And I believe in total, did you receive 9 items? And I believe 5 of them were actually part of one packaging, but ultimately 9 items of testing.
So there were 8 items. Based on the report, there's just one line that says bras because there were 4 items submitted, or 5 items submitted within that item. So in total, 8 items
Thank you
encompassing in that report.
I'm sorry, I talked over. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so the first item you received was a piece of paper with apparent blood. Can you tell us, and that was FDI item number 1, agency exhibit number 1-4. Can you tell us about that item and your analysis?
Yes, for that item, it did give chemical indications for the presence of blood. And a complete DNA profile consistent with a female individual was obtained from this item. Again, at the time, the comparisons I had to make were from Ayanna Sawyer, Johnathan Quiles, and Kamar Humphrey, all of whom were excluded as the source of this DNA profile.
And Mr. Coutu, later after receiving additional known standards, did you compare them as well?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings, sir?
These individuals were also excluded, which would be Stevie Griffin, Kim Mobley, Samaya Mobley, and Kyrie Mobley, as being the source of this DNA profile.
So all of the known standards that you have received up to now have excluded that female profile?
Yes, I did not receive any buccal swabs that matched the female profile from that apparent blood stain.
And next, did you receive an FDI item number 2, agency exhibit -6-1, a pair of underwear?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings?
This item failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. And again, 2 samples were taken from this item, one from the crotch and one from a swabbing of the waistband. The crotch failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process, and no DNA results were obtained from the swabbing of the item.
Next, in FDLE number 3, agency exhibit 6-2, it's a leopard print bra. What were your findings?
This item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process.
And then in that grouping of 5 items, were they all 5 items bras?
Yes.
Did they include a tan bra,
Yes.
a pink bra, a black and pink bra, and a burgundy bra?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in reference to the tan bra, what were your findings?
The DNA results obtained from the tan bra demonstrated the presence of a mixture. However, due to the limited nature of the mixture, this data was not interpretable.
Then in reference, I think your findings were similar in nature for the pink bra, the black bra, and the black and pink bra.
Yes, for these items, limited DNA results were obtained, therefore the data was not interpretable, and in particular for items, the pink bra and the black bra, which would be FDLE items 4.2 and 4.3, they also failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And then lastly in the submission, 4.5, 6-3, the burgundy bra, what were your findings?
This item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for the STR DNA testing process.
Showing you states 42, do you recognize it?
Yes.
And is that one of the items that we just discussed? Is it FDLE number 3?
It's FDLE number 2. It
Number
was
2, I apologize.
the underwear that was submitted.
And that's then agency 6-1?
Yes.
And I believe you stated that there were not enough DNA for testing?
For the crotch of the underwear, it failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of DNA for STR DNA testing, and for a swabbing taken from the underwear, there were no DNA results obtained.
And looking at states 42, do we also see the circles of area, just like you did with the rain suit? In states 62A and B.
Yes, there are a variety of areas that I have circled of staining that were tested and all proved to be negative or failed to give chemical indications for the possible presence of blood.
Next, I'm showing what's a composite, which is states 43, A, B, and C. And it's FDLE number 19, and I forgot to show this to you earlier, and I apologize for that, Mr. Coutu. Were these the last, part of the last 3 bras that you had received?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Coutu, going all the way back to when your first submission was received, was that in May of 2018?
Specifically for which case?
That would have been 2018-0402811.
Yes, the first submission in that case was May 24th of 2018.
And did you receive in that submission an item labeled sexual assault evidence kit from Ayanna Sawyer?
Yes.
And were there items contained within that package?
Yes, the sexual assault evidence kit contained buccal swabs from Ayanna Sawyer, as well as vaginal swabs, labial swabs, swabs from the left neck, and underwear.
I'm showing you State's Evidence 60. Please orient yourself. And is that the sexual assault kit that you received back in May of 2018?
Yes, this is.
Okay, I'm going to leave it up here for the next line of questioning. So in regards to the sexual assault kit that you received, what was the first item that you reviewed?
The first item that was examined was the buccal swabs, and cuttings were taken from that item for the STR DNA testing process.
So let's talk about the buccal swabs first. Would that be the known standard of the individual who underwent the sexual assault examination?
Yes.
And were you able to complete a known full profile of the individual labeled as and mentioned as Ayanna Sawyer?
Yes, a complete DNA profile was obtained from this item.
Now, prior to the cuttings, did you receive 4 categories of swabs that you had indicated earlier?
Yes, so when the sex kit is initially opened, it's inventoried for what's inside, and then systematically, one by one, cuttings are taken or samples taken from each item.
And then in regards to the swabs from the left neck, were you able to do STR DNA analysis?
Yes.
And what did you opine?
This item demonstrated the presence of a mixture that was consistent with 3 donors, including at least 1 male contributor, and Ayanna Sawyer is expected to be a donor to this exhibit.
So now I'm going to just fast forward a little bit in regards to when you received 2 additional items. We've already talked about the known DNA, and you've shown that to the jury regarding Johnathan Quiles. And did you also receive that known DNA labeled Kamar Humphrey?
Yes.
And did you compare the known DNA standards of Johnathan Quiles and Kamar Humphrey to your findings in the swab from the left neck?
Yes.
What did you opine?
Johnathan Quiles is excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained from this item, and Kamar Humphrey was included as a possible contributor to the mixture. The observed mixed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample had originated from Ayanna Sawyer, Kamar Humphrey, and an unrelated individual, than from Ayanna Sawyer and 2 unrelated individuals.
And then in regards to the labial swabs, were you able to conduct STR DNA analysis on that item?
No, this item failed to demonstrate a sufficient amount of male DNA for the STR DNA testing process. Next,
in regards to the vaginal swabs, were you able to conduct STR DNA analysis on this particular swab?
Yes. This item demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male contributor, and Ayanna Sawyer is expected to be a donor to this exhibit.
And did you compare these findings to the known standards of Johnathan Quiles and Kamar Humphrey?
Yes. Johnathan Quiles is excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained from this item, and Kamar Humphrey is included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 200,000 times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Ayanna Sawyer and Kamar Humphrey than from Ayanna Sawyer and an unrelated individual.
Now, I'm moving on to the underwear. You stated that you had taken some cuttings. Now, can you show or point to the underwear of where you would have made those cuttings?
Yes, so anywhere where you can see approximate squares or rectangles that were cut out alongside the inside of the crotch, those were the cuttings that I placed into a sterile tube for my STR-DNA testing of this item.
And just looking at this exhibit, are the underwear pink and black?
Yes.
Now, where on the underwear did you take these cuttings?
They appear to be along the inside crotch of the underwear.
And is that where you took all of your cuttings from in regards to this underwear?
Yes, I believe so. I would have to double check with my bench notes to confirm.
Would you just take a moment to refresh your recollection to see if there's any additional places
Sure.
besides the inside of the crotch area?
Yes, so the cuttings were taken from the inside crotch. I had observed heavy yellowish white staining along the inside crotch, and then took my cuttings from this area of staining.
So is it fair to say then all of the areas that were tested from this item was the inside crotch area?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, first, were you able, before we get to known standards, were you able to submit that area that you obtained from the inside crotch area for STR DNA analysis?
Yes.
And what were your findings at this time?
At the time, the DNA results obtained from this item demonstrated the presence of a mixture that was consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 contributor, and Ayanna Sawyer was expected to be a donor to this exhibit.
Now, after you received the 2 known standards, again, of Kamar Humphrey and Johnathan Quiles, did your findings change in regards to the donor aspect?
Yes, the item was reassessed in terms of the number of contributors that were consistent with the mixture, because upon visual examination and statistical analysis, non-intuitive results were obtained from my initial comparison. So then the item was reported as possibly having originated from 2 or 3 individuals.
So after you received the known standard, based upon looking at the statistical data and looking at the known standard, that then had you opine that it was 2 or 3 donors. That's fair to say?
Correct, because originally the data presented itself as 2 donors from what it looked like, but when I had additional information I was presented and was conducting my analyses, the statistical analysis and the visual comparison didn't make sense. They were not intuitive in that sense. So then I needed to increase the number of contributors to account for that, to make it consistent with 3 donors. but there were results reported still for either an assumption of 2 or an assumption of 3 subsequent to that.
Okay, well, first, I will ask you about the comparison then to the known standard of Kamar Humphrey. What did you opine?
So assuming 2 donors to this mixture, Kamar Humphrey is excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained. And assuming 3 donors to the mixture, comparison of the profile from Kamar Humphrey failed to demonstrate statistical support for inclusion or exclusion. Therefore, no determination can be made regarding the contribution of Kamar Humphrey to this item.
Now, if looking at the item as in regards to 3 donors, is that because if there was a third donor, would that be too low then to include or exclude someone? Or actually include, because you weren't able to include or exclude, right?
Correct. For Kamar Humphrey, I was unable to include or exclude. They fell into an inconclusive area.
And is that based upon how much data was available if a third donor existed?
Yes, the contribution amount from that third donor was quite low, so it would be common for someone to be inconclusive potentially. We say inconclusive because you don't want the possibility of falsely including or falsely excluding someone, so there simply wasn't a sufficient statistical support for me to say one way or another whether they were outright excluded or included as a possible contributor.
And that's in regards to Kamar Humphrey with the interior crotch area of that underwear.
Correct.
Now, lastly, in the comparison regarding the known standard of Johnathan Quiles, can you please tell us what you opined?
Yes, so assuming 2 donors to the mixture, Johnathan Quiles is excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile. And assuming 3 donors to the mixture, Johnathan Quiles is included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample had originated from Ayanna Sawyer, Johnathan Quiles, and an unrelated individual than from Ayanna Sawyer and 2 unrelated individuals.
So based upon that, regarding the possibility of a third donor, the defendant's Johnathan Quiles' DNA was associated then with the cutouts that you did from the interior crotch area of that underwear from Ayanna Sawyer's sexual assault kit?
Yes, assuming 3 donors at that time, then he was included as a possible contributor because his DNA profile was consistent with contributing to the DNA types that were present in that sample.
No further questions.
I got to take a break. I told the jury 11:45. I'm going to stick to that. Members of the jury, it's 11:45. It's 11:40. We're going to take a lunch break. Let's come back at 12:35. I'll give you 55 minutes. We'll try to get through the afternoon. Please remember, do not discuss the case among yourselves or each other. Do not do any independent research. And we'll pick up at 12:35. Well, I meant to say 12:35 to the jury if I said anything. 12:35. All right, the jury's outside our presence. Mr. Coutu, you're more than welcome to. I need to be back by 12:35. Sorry if it interrupts your afternoon.
No, thank you.
All right, anything we need to take care of outside the jury's presence before our lunch break?
Judge, I must, but I know the court wants to take a quick.
I can't hear you.
Yes, sir. I know the court wants to take a break, but I have to put on the record. So this morning, I told the court and counsel that the deposition of Damian Hatch, deposition came out that he said the defendant told him he dumped the gun. He's read that. I prepped him, and he said that's not what I said. So out of an abundance of caution and just to make sure, I reached out to the court recording company. They have found it on the audio themselves and in the billions of words that they always get right. They have conceded error. They have now gone back and listened to the audio. The word that came out of his mouth was the defendant told him that he dumped the body. I have not had a chance to tell the defense that because I was just receiving a text from the company owner. I think this is precision reporting. So I'm advising first and foremost the record as well as counsel for the defendant so that they know that if they go down that route of trying to impeach him that he said the word gun when he believes he said the word body, the state would most certainly clear that up with a rebuttal witness and or potentially dealing with it thereafter. So I just want to make the record clear. They have gone back and listened to it. I will do everything I can over the lunch break to make sure the defense gets to speak to either the president and or the court reporter of the company to verify that they have gone back and listened to the audio and it is clear to them the word that's in the deposition is incorrect. He did not say gun, he said body.
Okay. Anything else we need to take care of from the state's perspective?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Anything from the defense perspective?
Judge, he doesn't need to worry about calling a rebuttal witness about that issue, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys at 12:35.
Sir.
From the state defense, and Mr. Quiles present. Anything we need to handle outside the presence of the jury first for the state?
Extremely brief for the state. We are making an announcement. We do not intend to call Kamar Humphrey. I've advised counsel from the defendant plus. We've also advised him we are going to extend his stay and travel. We just want to make it clear for the record that from this point forward, we're not holding it. We're doing it at the request of the defense, just simply for administrative and cost purposes.
Okay, anything else from the state?
Yes, sir.
Defense?
Judge, we understand that. I already told Mr. Skinner, give me an idea as to what we have to do to make it happen, and we will. On that note, the other thing, Judge.
You enter a subpoena from the defense?
Yes, he is.
Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's just a matter of cost, Judge. I just need to know what we have to do.
Understood.
On that. The other thing that was brought to my attention when the transcript issue was brought up, I did talk to precise court reporting. Judge, and I looked back, the order was entered for the two witnesses on Damian Hatch and that, but we don't have the order on the remaining witnesses that we had discussed so that I can get our court reporter paid for the copies.
Send to my office. I don't know if it's in my email or not. I thought I signed everything you needed me to sign.
This was the one where there was a discrepancy between the two. I'll read.
Correct, because the issue was the order said it was delayed because of the hurricane. That's not why it was delayed. I wasn't going to sign an S phrase. So I deleted the portions of it that were irrelevant and signed everything else. Because it sounds like they were ordered, you just never got a copy of it.
Right.
So get me an order that's clean, for payment purposes for the court reporter, and I, of course, will sign it after JAC's response.
Yes, sir, Your Honor. Thank you.
Anything else from either party?
Yes, actually. The only other matter, Your Honor, very briefly, is in regards to the Google videos. We have a new disc that includes both of them. I know the defense had thought that they had included both. That was always the intent. So if we can just substitute that then for record purposes.
What exhibit number is this?
35, yes, sir.
So you're basically swapping out the new CD for the one that was put in evidence.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Any objection from the defense? That objection, you guys can take care of that.
That's all from the state. Yes, sir, Your Honor.
We've gotten through 1.5 witnesses today. It's 12:30. Let's bring the jury out, please.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Mr. Gray? Sorry. 1 second. Can we bring Mr. Coutu back out? I apologize. Thank you, counsel.
Good job, yeah, good catch.
Okay, while he's coming up, Mr. Coutu will go ahead and get the jury out. It'll take you a minute, and then it will mesh up.
Your Honor, the jury enters report.
All right, members of the jury, welcome back. Everyone may have a seat. We're going to hope you guys had a nice lunch. We're going to continue with Mr. Coutu's examination. If you recall, the state finished their direct. We're going to pick up now with the defense's cross. With that said, Ms. Michelle, you may inquire. You're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Coutu.
Good afternoon.
All right, I know we took a break, so I kind of want to pick back up a little bit where we left off and kind of go through a few things with you. I won't go through every single item in great detail, but I just want to kind of recap and make sure we're on the same page.
Okay.
All right, I want to start out with the last item that you described and kind of went through. And that was the sex assault kit that you examined and that you received from, I believe it was in May of 2018, correct?
Yes, it was received in May of 2018.
And in those items that you analyzed, you were able to give some determination as to DNA being in the presence of, on the neck, I believe, in the vaginal swabs, as well as in the crotch area of the underwear that you examined. Is that correct?
That is correct. These all yielded results that were interpretable.
All the other items that you examined did not have any results that were interpretable, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When you examined the vaginal swabs and the swabs from the neck of IS, Kamar Humphrey's DNA was definitively found to have been present in those swabs, correct?
Kamar Humphrey's DNA profile was consistent with a contributor in each of those mixtures, yes.
Okay. As it relates to the vaginal swabs, did you confirm the type of DNA that you obtained from that particular swab?
No, the results are only indicative of whether or not someone's DNA profile might be present as a contributor, but I wasn't able to deduce the source of the DNA in terms of where it came from.
To do that, you would need a serology test, correct?
Typically, yes. Serological testing is definitive confirmatory tests for bodily fluids.
And that would tell you what type of biological material that was, whether it was blood, semen, urine, skin, or some other type that I'm not mentioning.
Yes, there's a variety of tests for each.
Okay. You did not do that on the vaginal swab that you took from IS, and that you analyzed from IS's sex assault kit, correct?
Correct. No serology was done. This is per our policy and how we process sexual assault kits.
Understood. As far as the DNA goes, though, you definitively found that as Kamar Humphrey being a contributor to those items.
Yes, he was included as a possible contributor for both items.
Okay. And when it comes to the underwear, you originally analyzed that assuming 2 donors, correct?
Correct.
And when you analyzed it, you based that 2 donor, just so I can make sure I understand, that 2 donor contributor number based off of the data, correct?
Yes. So the data I am interpreting, it looks like peaks on a graph similar to an EKG, and that's how I'm able to deduce how many individuals might be present and then make comparisons to those DNA types.
And when you found 2 donors, assuming 2 donors, Mr. Quiles was excluded as a possible contributor, correct?
Correct.
Now I want to talk to you about
when it comes to 3 donors. You analyzed it for 3 donors because visually, when you observed it, it seemed as if it did not match what the data presented. Is that correct?
Correct. There were so many consistencies upon doing a visual examination comparing the buccal swabs from Johnathan Quiles to this mixture that a statistical exclusion was not intuitive at that point because of how much consistency was there. The statistical software I use was unable to generate a stat to be able to perform an inclusion because of, as I said before, an exclusion that it was making at certain regions of the DNA. But again, from my visual examination, just seeing how much consistency there was, it didn't make sense for the comparisons I was making that the results should stay as a mixture of 2 individuals. So then it was reassessed as a mixture of possibly originating from 3 individuals.
And as far as whether it's 2 or whether it's 3, you cannot definitively tell us whether it is 2 or whether it was 3. That's why you've provided us with assuming 2, assuming 3 conclusions, correct?
Correct. On the front end, it presented itself as 2 individuals. Mixture interpretation can be somewhat difficult at times. As I said before, the data that I'm looking at looks like peaks on a graph. And essentially, I compare it to if someone were to tell me to identify songs being played at the same time. It would depend on how many songs you were playing at the same time, what the volumes were in proportion to one another. And so that all kind of is taken into consideration with, yes, it presented itself as 2 contributors. There was 1 donor that was contributing a lot more, and it appeared that there was only a second contributor. But again, when I was making my comparisons, it didn't appear that there were only 2 contributors because there was, it was not intuitive to exclude visually just based on that alone and to not reassess it. It was best practice at that point to reassess it as then 2 or 3 and to make comparisons and to report results for both.
And just so that it's clear, you went from there being 2 donors to your opinion now being 2 or 3, not simply 2 before, now 3. You still have that, it could be 2, it could be 3, correct?
Correct, because the report had been released as 2, and looking back at the data, it does present itself as a mixture of 2. But again, it's not intuitive based on the comparisons that were made and the statistics that are being performed. So that's why it was reanalyzed as 3, but that doesn't preclude it from still having been reported as 2, because that's truly how the data had presented itself at the time with the information that I had.
Thank you so much for clearing that up. Now, as it relates to this particular sample, you did not do any serology testing on this either, correct?
Correct, I did not.
So you cannot definitively tell us, like I just asked you for the other items, what type of DNA or biological material this originated from, correct?
Correct. I didn't do any sort of serological testing or observe any sort of materials under the microscope to be able to confirm the source of the DNA. In some cases, I'm able to opine based on my experience and professional expertise whether or not I'm confident the source of the DNA material. I wouldn't be able to state that in this case.
Okay. In this case, you would not be able to give us a definitive, this is my confident opinion as to what type of biological material this could be.
I can give the reasoning to where it could potentially be semen as the source of, for example, the crotch at the end of the underwear that we've been discussing, but I wouldn't be able to definitively state that.
Is it possible that it also could be epithelial, meaning skin related?
It is possible that it could be from skin cells. The amount of DNA that was present in the sample was in a low amount, especially compared to the amount that was from the victim. So because of that, I can't say definitively whether or not it was from semen.
Or from something else? Or
from skin cells if someone had touched the item. Based on the extraction methodology that was used on this sample, the cuttings are placed into a tube, and then in order to extract the DNA into solution from the sample to be able to generate the results that I obtained, it's processed in a way to try to separate any DNA from skin cells separate from DNA from sperm cells.
Understood. All right, let me ask you a little bit about the other items that we kind of went through, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. I think we've covered them very well before, but because we took a break, I just want to kind of go through and clear up a couple things. As it relates to the firearm that you analyzed, that is a firearm that you received from, and I'm going to say it wrong, but the ballistics section within FDLE, correct?
So I believe the firearm was first worked by the biology section and then transferred to the firearm section for subsequent analysis.
Do you recall an analyst, Laura Draga, asking you to view some unknown substance within the barrel of that gun?
I do not recall that offhand, no.
All right, no problem, and that's fine. You did, in fact, look at what this unknown substance was within that barrel of gun, even if you can't remember why you looked at it.
Okay.
Correct, you did, in fact, look at the material. I think you described it as brownish in nature.
Yes, I know there was brownish staining on the firearm, and if she had documented that we had a discussion regarding additional staining that was consistent, then I probably would have looked at that as well.
Okay. And you did, in fact, do some testing on that, and that did not come back to be blood?
Correct. That failed to give chemical indications for the possible presence of blood.
Okay. And let me just run through all the other things really quickly. Some items, I know you received them at different times, but I want to kind of take them in bulk, and so it probably will mess you up as it relates to your reports because they're from different times. But you received quite a few items that were found within the landfill, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so there were a lot of bras, there were some underwear, and there were a couple other items that I'm going to go through. But the bras and underwear, there was no blood found on any of the items that appear to have blood that was related to this case, correct?
Correct. I believe for any underwear or bras that were submitted from the landfill, if the presumptive test was conducted because of the possibility that there's staining, they all failed to give chemical indications for blood.
Same thing for any DNA that would be related to this case.
Yes, I'd have to review either there was an insufficient amount of DNA for the STR-DNA testing process, or it was uninterpretable due to either obtaining no results or such limited results that I couldn't make any sort of interpretation.
Thank you so much. As it relates to, I believe there was one item that you were provided that was like a piece of paper with some blood. That particular item was also found within the landfill, correct? It was submitted along with, I believe it was 8 items in that particular.
I'm not familiar. The case comments for that submission of the piece of paper state that it was located in a car.
Understood. And so that vehicle that it was found within was an item of interest, correct?
I would assume so.
And that came back, you were able to create a DNA profile from that was consistent with a single female contributor, correct?
I did take a sample from the apparent blood staining, and I was able to develop a complete female profile for that sample.
And again, that was not related to anyone in this case that you could find.
Correct. I believe everyone was excluded based on comparisons to that profile.
All right, and I'll just go through the last few. There was an electric saw and the rain suit. Those were recovered from the defendants, from Mr. Quiles' possession or from his wife's possession potentially, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and again, no blood, no DNA, nothing as it relates to this case was found in that.
Only presumptive testing for blood was conducted on the saw and the jacket and pants. So when there was no chemical indication for the presence of blood, no further samples were taken, except I believe there were swabs taken from the saw, just in case they were ever to be resubmitted, that I wouldn't have to re-examine the entire saw itself. But no further samples were taken. So I didn't take a swab of, say, the collar or the inside for example, who's wearing it. The only thing I was looking for in those cases or instances were if there was blood present.
Okay. And you didn't look to see if there was any other type of biological material potentially that would be present on either of those items, correct?
Correct. I don't believe I did presumptive testing for any other bodily fluid, nor did I do any swabs for any sort of DNA that might be present on the items.
Right, and I know that you were asked this on direct about whether rain or something like that could have potentially degraded whatever blood potentially could be on that suit. And I believe your answer was that one of two options, sure, it could be degraded, but also it could just never have been blood, correct?
Correct. In my experience with training samples, we deal with blood samples that have been left out on roofs or buried in sand or rinsed in order to see if we can still obtain possible results. So that's why when I do get negative results on presumptive tests for blood, it's usually one of two things. Either the stain was not blood to begin with, or if it is blood, it's present in such a low concentration, the chemicals that I'm testing for, that it's beneath the threshold of my testing.
Understood. Thank you so much for your testimony. I don't think I have anything further, but give me just one moment.
Nothing further. Very brief follow-up, Your Honor. Mr. Coutu, I just want to follow up with one thing that you had discussed with Ms. Michelle during cross-examination. You had mentioned that per policy, you all do not test specifically for serology. Could you just explain that a little bit further, please?
Sure. So current policy for processing sexual assault kits is that they are simply cut and then processed through the STR-DNA testing process to determine the amount of the quantity of male DNA that might be present in the samples. So traditional serology is not typically done on these. Current policy states that traditional serology is more so conducted on items of clothing that weren't worn directly or immediately after the alleged assault. So in this case, that's why I was able to just take samples directly on for the testing process. And to kind of describe that process a little more, when I say STR-DNA testing, it's a 4-step process where the first step, I extract any DNA present into solution from the sample. The second step, I estimate how much DNA is present in the sample, both in general as well as male-specific DNA. And that's the step where a lot of the results you heard earlier when I say there was not enough DNA or a sufficient amount of male DNA, it's from that second step when I can tell how much DNA is in the sample. If it's in such a low concentration, it doesn't proceed further with testing. Because we validated it to where you're not expected to get any results whatsoever. If it does have a sufficient amount of DNA to continue with testing, I'll isolate those 24 regions of DNA that I use for comparisons with someone's DNA profile and visualize that in the final step as data, the peaks on the graph that I mentioned before. So in this particular instance, we don't do serology. However, there is a particular extraction methodology when you think that semen is possibly present to be able to try and isolate DNA from sperm cells away from DNA from non-sperm cells, so for example, skin cells. And that did occur with that sample that we had discussed, the crotch of the underwear. This is referred to as a differential extraction. So I would add chemicals and heat to be able to release any DNA from non-sperm cells into solution. I then use an instrument to pipette or remove that DNA that's in solution from the tube, and then additional chemicals and heat are used to try and lyse open or break open the sperm cells that might be present and release that DNA into then what's known as the sperm cell fraction, and the epithelial cell fraction is what was removed to begin with, which would be the skin cell fraction, as some refer to it as. So the results that we've been discussing, the mixture of 2 that was reassessed as a mixture of 3, were specifically from the sperm cell fraction, is where the DNA results were obtained. However, because the DNA that was released from the skin cells in the first round of chemicals and heat being added, some of it can residually be left behind and it's not completely separated out. And that's what was seen in this sample. So a large portion of the DNA that was obtained in the mixture was from the victim, Ayanna Sawyer. And despite it being the sperm cell fraction where you would expect only sperm cell DNA to be present, there is the chance that DNA that was released from that initial addition of heat and chemicals was left behind in the tube. So because of that, there is indication that it could be from semen based on where the majority of the male concentration of DNA was found, which is the sperm cell fraction rather than the epithelial cell fraction. But with the amount of carryover that was noted of skin cell DNA from Ayanna Sawyer, and with the general low contribution of the foreign DNA, I'm not confident enough to definitively state that without having conducted serological testing.
Okay, so I just want to do 2 simple questions here. So is it fair to say, just very briefly, that traditional serology testing is not done per policy at FSU, listen to me, at FDLE because you're looking to try to get the highest concentration of a sample? And is that why then it's not specifically in one route of DNA testing?
Yes, for one, the methodologies we use to determine if there's enough DNA, especially male DNA, to proceed with testing versus to do traditional serology, it's a much faster means of processing more evidence that's submitted to the laboratory. But also, we do try and attempt to preserve as much sample as possible to get the best DNA yield as possible. So that's also policy to where even an item of clothing separate from being worn at the time of the assault that traditionally would undergo serology, if the staining is so small that I would have to consume it to do my serological testing, we forego the serological testing in order to try and generate as much DNA results as I can for that sample.
And then lastly, Mr. Coutu, for this afternoon, just so your ultimately opinion regarding the DNA from that crotch area of that underwear is that that it came from a sperm cell fraction that had opened, and that it's likely from sperm, but you cannot definitively state that it's sperm. Is that fair to say?
It's possibly from sperm, given the extraction methodology used that I described, and the fact that the majority of the DNA concentration for a male was in that fraction versus the skin cell fraction. But again, with the low contribution amount and the amount of carryover from skin cell DNA, especially from the victim that was noted in that fraction, I can't definitively state whether or not it was sperm semen.
Right, you just can't definitively say.
Correct.
All right, nothing further, Your Honor.
Sir, good to see you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.